The letter trembled in my hands, its crisp edges cutting into my fingers like the words sliced through my heart. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My husband, Seth, the man I'd built a life with for the past decade, was secretly planning to sell our home, our sanctuary. "Mommy, can we have ice cream?" Emily's sweet voice broke through my shock. I quickly folded the letter and shoved it into my pocket. "Of course, sweetie. Let's go to the kitchen." I forced a smile, determined not to let my 5-year-old see the turmoil brewing inside me. As I scooped strawberry ice cream into a bowl for Emily, my mind raced. How long had Seth been planning this? Why hadn't he talked to me about it? The weight of betrayal settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. The front door opened and Seth's voice called out, "I'm home." Emily squealed with delight and ran to greet her father. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. "Hey, hon," Seth said, walking into the kitchen. He kissed my cheek, but I turned away, unable to reciprocate. "Everything okay?" I met his gaze, searching for any sign of guilt or remorse. "We need to talk, Seth. Emily, sweetie, why don't you go watch some cartoons?" Once our daughter was out of earshot, I pulled the letter from my pocket. "Care to explain this?" Seth's face paled as he recognized the real estate agent's letterhead. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is you've been making plans behind my back to sell our home." "Our home, Seth." He ran a hand through his hair, sighing heavily. "Carolyn, it's not what you think. I was just exploring our options." "Options?" I spat the word out. "Since when is selling the house we've built our life in an option? And why wouldn't you discuss this with me first?" Seth's expression hardened. "Look, we're struggling financially. You know that. I'm just trying to find a solution." "By going behind my back? By making decisions that affect our entire family without even consulting me?" My voice rose, and I struggled to keep it down for Emily's sake. "You're overreacting," Seth said dismissively. "It was just a preliminary inquiry, nothing set in stone." His cavalier attitude only fueled my anger. "That's not the point, Seth. We're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to make these decisions together." Before Seth could respond, the doorbell rang. He looked relieved at the interruption. "That'll be Mom and Dad. They're stopping by for dinner, remember?" My heart sank. Of course, his parents would choose today of all days to visit. "Perfect timing," I muttered. As Seth went to answer the door, I tried to compose myself. Walter and Dolores swept into the house, their presence immediately filling every corner. "Carolyn, dear," Dolores said, air-kissing my cheeks. "I hope you've prepared something nice for dinner. You know how Walter loves his pot roast." I bit back a retort. "Actually, I was thinking of ordering in tonight. It's been a long day." Dolores clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Oh, nonsense. A good wife always has a home-cooked meal ready for her family." I caught Seth's eye, silently pleading for support, but he just shrugged and mouthed, "It's fine." As I reluctantly headed to the kitchen to throw together a last-minute meal, I overheard Walter's booming voice. "So, son, have you given any more thought to that business proposition I mentioned? It could really turn things around you financially." My hands froze on the refrigerator door. Another secret Seth had been keeping from me? I leaned closer, straining to hear Seth's response. "Dad, I told you I'm handling things my way," Seth said, his voice low but firm. "Your way?" Walter scoffed. "Your way has you living paycheck to paycheck. It's time to make some real changes, son." I'd heard enough. Slamming the refrigerator shut, I marched back into the living room. "You know what? I'm not feeling well. I think we'll have to reschedule dinner." 4 pairs of eyes turned to me in surprise. Seth looked confused, Dolores offended, and Walter annoyed, but it was Emily's worried gaze that nearly broke my resolve. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked, her little brow furrowed with concern. I knelt down and hugged her tight. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just a little headache. Why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" As Emily scampered off, I faced the others. "I'm sorry, but I really need to lie down. Seth, could you see your parents out?" Without waiting for a response, I turned and headed for our bedroom, my mind whirling with newfound determination. It was clear now, something had to change, and if Seth wouldn't do it, then I would have to take matters into my own hands. The doorbell's chime sent a wave of dread through me. I glanced at the clock, 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, right on schedule. "I've got it," Seth called from the living room. I braced myself as Walter and Dolores breezed in, their presence filling our home like an invasive fog. It had been 3 days since I discovered Seth's secret plans to sell our house, and the tension between us was palpable. "Carolyn." "Dear," Dolores cooed, her eyes scanning our living room critically. "I see you haven't dusted the mantel this week." I bit back a retort. "I've been busy with Emily's school projects." Walter harumphed. "A woman's first duty is to her home, isn't that right, Seth?" I watched my husband, silently pleading for him to defend me. Instead, he shrugged. "Mom and Dad are just trying to help, Carolyn." The betrayal stung. I turned away, busying myself in the kitchen to hide my hurt. As I prepared coffee, I overheard their conversation. "Son, have you given any more thought to that business opportunity I mentioned?" Walter's voice carried a note of impatience. "Dad, I told you." "Now, Seth," Dolores interrupted. "Your father knows best. You should listen to him." I nearly dropped the coffee pot. Another secret? How many more were there? Composing myself, I carried the tray into the living room. "Here's the coffee. Emily will be home from school soon, so we can't visit long." Dolores waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. We'll stay for dinner. I'm sure you have something prepared." My jaw clenched. "Actually, Great," Walter boomed. "I'm in the mood for your pot roast, Carolyn." I looked to Seth, hoping he'd intervene, but he was absorbed in his phone. Anger bubbled up inside me. "I'm sorry, but I don't have anything prepared. We weren't expecting company." The room fell silent. Dolores' eyes narrowed. "Well, I never. Seth, are you going to let your wife speak to us like that?" Seth finally looked up, his expression a mix of confusion and annoyance. "Carolyn, what's the problem? Can't you just whip something up?" That was the last straw. "No, Seth, I can't just whip something up. I have a life beyond catering to your parents' every whim." Walter stood up, his face reddening. "Now see here, young lady." "No, you see here," I snapped. "This is my home, and I won't be bullied in it. Not by you, not by Dolores, and certainly not by my own husband." The room erupted into chaos. Dolores gasped dramatically, Walter bellowed about respect, and Seth just sat there looking bewildered. Suddenly, a small voice cut through the noise. "Mommy? Daddy? Why is everyone yelling?" We all turned to see Emily standing in the doorway, her backpack clutched tightly to her chest. The sight of her frightened face doused my anger instantly. "It's okay, sweetie," I said, moving to embrace her. "Grandma and Grandpa were just leaving." Seth finally found his voice. "Mom, Dad, I think it's best if you go. We'll talk later." As Walter and Dolores huffed their way out the door, I held Emily close, stroking her hair. Seth approached us cautiously. "Carolyn, what's gotten into you?" he asked, his voice low. I met his gaze, my resolve strengthening. "We need to talk, Seth, but not now, not in front of Emily." He nodded, a flicker of worry crossing his face. Good, I thought. He should be worried. Later that night, after tucking Emily into bed, I found Seth in his study. The letter from the real estate agent lay on his desk. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Seth sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was waiting for the right time. We're struggling, Carolyn. The house is too expensive. I thought—" "You thought wrong," I interrupted. "This isn't just your decision to make. And what about this business opportunity your father mentioned? Another secret?" His silence was all the answer I needed. I felt something inside me break. "I can't do this anymore, Seth. The secrets, the disrespect, your parents' constant interference. Something has to change." Seth stood up, reaching for me. "Carolyn, please, we can work this out." I stepped back, shaking my head. "Can we? Because right now I'm not so sure." As I turned to leave the room, Seth called out, "What are you saying?" I paused at the doorway, my hand on the knob. "I'm saying that if things don't change, and fast, you might just get your wish to sell this house. But I won't be here when you do." With that, I walked out, alone with the weight of his secrets and the consequences of his actions. As I climbed into our cold, empty bed, I realized that for the first time in years, I felt something other than resignation. I felt hope. The morning light filtered through the curtains, illuminating the empty space beside me. Seth had taken to sleeping in the guest room, a silent acknowledgement of the growing chasm between us. I sighed, steeling myself for another day of tension and unspoken words. As I made my way downstairs, I heard Emily's laughter mingling with Seth's voice. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps things were improving. But as I rounded the corner into the kitchen, reality came crashing back. "Mommy," Emily exclaimed, her face lighting up. "Daddy says we're going to move to a bigger house with a pool." I froze, my eyes locking with Seth's. His expression was a mix of guilt and defiance. "I thought we agreed to wait," I said, my voice low and controlled. Seth shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "She overheard me on the phone. I had to explain." "On the phone?" I repeated, my anger rising. "So you're still pursuing this without talking to me?" "Carolyn, please," Seth said, gesturing towards Emily. "Not now." I bit my tongue, forcing a smile for our daughter's sake. "Emily, sweetie, why don't you go get dressed for school? I need to talk to Daddy." Once Emily was out of earshot, I turned on Seth. "How dare you? We're supposed to be a team, Seth. You can't just make unilateral decisions about our family's future." "What team?" Seth snapped back. "You've been cold and distant for weeks. Someone has to make decisions around here." Cold and distant? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I've been trying to process the fact that my husband has been lying to me and planning major life changes behind my back. Seth's face hardened. "I'm doing what's best for this family. If you can't see that, maybe you're not as committed to us as you claim to be." His words hit me like a physical blow. "Not committed? I've given everything to this family, Seth. Everything. And you have the audacity to question my commitment?" Our argument was interrupted by a small sob. We turned to see Emily standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Please stop fighting," she whimpered. Guilt washed over me as I moved to comfort her. "Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry. Mommy and Daddy just had a disagreement. Everything's okay." But as I held my crying daughter, I knew everything was far from okay. The look Seth gave me as he left for work was cold and distant, a far cry from the loving husband I once knew. Throughout the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Emily was quieter than usual, her usual exuberance dimmed by the morning's events. As I tucked her into bed that night, she looked up at me with worried eyes. "Mommy, are you and Daddy going to get a divorce like Jenny's parents?" My heart shattered. "Oh, honey," I said, struggling to find the right words. "Mommy and Daddy are just going through a rough patch. We both love you very much, and that will never change." But as I closed Emily's door, I couldn't help but wonder if I was lying to her. The thought of divorce had been creeping into my mind more and more lately, but hearing it from my daughter's lips made it feel terrifyingly real. I made my way to Seth's study, determined to have a real conversation, but as I approached, I heard his hushed voice through the door. "I know, Dad. I'm working on it. Carolyn's being difficult, but I'll convince her. The house will be on the market by the end of the month, I promise." My world tilted on its axis. All this time, I'd hoped that Seth would come around, that we could work things out. But now I realized the truth. He had no intention of considering my feelings or opinions. He was going to sell our home, with or without my consent. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I'd spent years compromising, years putting everyone else's needs before my own. But no more. If Seth wanted a fight, he was going to get one. As I turned away from the study door, my mind was already racing with plans. It was time to take control of my own destiny, for my sake and for Emily's. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of determination ignite within me. Let Seth make his plans. I would make mine. And when the dust settled, he'd realize just how badly he'd underestimated me. The phone rang. Its cheerful tone, a stark contrast to the tension that had settled over our home. I answered, grateful for the distraction. "Carolyn, sweetheart?" My mother's voice filled me with warmth. "Your father and I have been thinking. We'd love to come visit next week. It's been too long since we've seen our granddaughter." For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile spread across my face. "Oh, Mom, that would be wonderful. Emily would love to see you both." As I hung up, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe my parents' visit would bring some much-needed light into our increasingly gloomy household. But my optimism was short-lived. "Who was that?" Seth's voice, cold and suspicious, came from behind me. I turned to face him. "It was my mom. They want to visit next week." Seth's expression darkened. "Absolutely not. We can't have visitors right now. I told you we need to get the house ready for sale." The spark of hope inside me flared into anger. "You mean the sale you're planning behind my back? The one I explicitly told you I don't want?" "Carolyn, be reasonable," Seth said, his tone patronizing. We've been over this. It's the best decision for our family. No, I shot back. It's the best decision for you. And as for my parents visiting, they're coming. End of discussion. Seth's face flushed with anger. I said no, Carolyn. This is my house too, and I have a say in who comes here. Your house? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What happened to our house, Seth? And why is it okay for your parents to barge in whenever they want, but mine can't visit? That's different, Seth sputtered. My parents are trying to help us, I laughed bitterly. Help us? By criticizing everything I do? By undermining me at every turn? Some help, that is. Seth's voice rose. At least they care about our financial future. Your parents have never lifted a finger to help us. Because we've never asked them to, I shouted back. They respect our independence, unlike your parents, who treat us like children. Our argument was interrupted by Emily's small voice. Daddy, why are you yelling at Mommy? We both turned to see our daughter standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. Seth's expression softened immediately. It's nothing, sweetheart, he said, reaching for her. Mommy and Daddy are just having a grown-up discussion. But Emily backed away from him, running to me instead. As I held her close, I saw something flicker in Seth's eyes. Hurt? Jealousy? Whatever it was quickly replaced by cold anger. Fine, he spat. Have your parents visit, but don't expect me to be here. I'll stay at my parents' place until they're gone. As he stormed out of the room, I felt a strange mix of relief and despair wash over me. How had we come to this? The man I married, the one who had promised to stand by me through thick and thin, was now treating me like an enemy. That night, as I lay in bed, my mind raced. I thought about Seth's ultimatum, about the house, about Emily's frightened face. Something had to give. I couldn't keep living like this, walking on eggshells in my own home, watching my daughter grow more anxious by the day. I reached for my phone, hesitating for just a moment before dialing. Mom? I said when she answered, my voice shaky. About your visit next week, I was wondering, would it be okay if Emily and I came to stay with you instead? There was a pause, and I could almost hear the concern in my mother's silence. Of course, sweetheart, she finally said. Is everything all right? I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. No, Mom, it's not, but I think it's time I did something about it. As I hung up, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. Things were about to change. And this time, I would be the one calling the shots. The morning sun filtered through the curtains as I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The house was quiet, Seth having left early for work without a word. Emily was still asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in our once happy home. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I knew I had to do. It was time to confront Seth, to lay all our cards on the table. No more secrets, no more silent treatments. We needed to talk about the house, about our future, about everything. As if on cue, I heard the front door open. Seth walked in, his suit wrinkled and his eyes tired. He froze when he saw me sitting there. Seth, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk. He sighed, loosening his tie. Carolyn, I'm exhausted. Can this wait? No, I replied firmly. It can't. Sit down, please. Reluctantly, he took a seat across from me. I pushed a folder towards him, watching as confusion flickered across his face. What's this? He asked. Open it, I said. As he flipped through the pages, his expression changed from confusion to shock, then to anger. Inside were printouts of all his secret correspondence with the real estate agent, bank statements showing large withdrawals I knew nothing about, and a draft contract for selling our house. Where did you get these? Seth demanded, his voice low and dangerous. That doesn't matter, I replied. What matters is that you've been lying to me, Seth, making huge decisions about our life without even consulting me. Why? Seth's face hardened. You wouldn't understand. I'm trying to secure our future, Carolyn. This house is dragging us down financially. And you didn't think I deserved to be part of that decision? I shot back. This is my home too, Seth. Our daughter's home. You can't just decide to sell it on a whim. It's not a whim, Seth shouted, slamming his hand on the table. We're drowning in debt, Carolyn. The business isn't doing well, and I've been trying to keep us afloat, but you're too busy playing house to see the reality of our situation. His words hit me like a slap. Playing house? Is that what you think I do all day? Take care of our daughter, manage our home, support you in every way I can. Seth's expression softened slightly. That's not what I meant. I didn't want to worry you with all this. So instead, you lied to me? I asked, my voice breaking. Made me feel like I was going crazy for suspecting something was wrong? I was protecting you, Seth insisted. No, I said, shaking my head. You were protecting yourself, from having to face the truth with me, from having to admit that things aren't perfect. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Finally, I spoke again. I've decided to go stay with my parents for a while, I said quietly. I'm taking Emily with me. Seth's head snapped up. What? You can't do that. I can, and I will, I replied, my resolve strengthening. We need some time apart, Seth, to figure out what we really want, and if this marriage is still what's best for both of us. Carolyn, please, Seth pleaded, reaching for my hand. We can work this out. I'll cancel the sale. We'll figure something else out. I pulled my hand away. It's too late for that, Seth. The trust is gone. I need time to think, to breathe. As if on cue, we heard Emily's footsteps on the stairs. Seth's eyes met mine, panic clear in his gaze. Don't tell her, he whispered urgently. Not yet. I nodded, forcing a smile as our daughter entered the kitchen. But as I watched Seth interact with Emily, pretending everything was fine, I felt something inside me harden. This wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about respect, trust, and the kind of life I wanted for myself and my daughter. Later that night, as I packed our bags in secret, I made a decision. This break with my parents wouldn't just be about thinking things over. It would be about planning my next move, about taking control of my life in a way I hadn't done in years. Seth had made his choices. Now it was time for me to make mine. The suitcases sat by the door, a silent testament to my resolve. Emily bounced excitedly nearby, chattering about seeing her grandparents. I forced a smile, my stomach churning with a mix of anticipation and dread. Are you sure about this, Carolyn? Seth's voice, tinged with desperation, came from behind me. I turned to face him, steeling myself against the pain in his eyes. We need this, Seth. I need this. He reached for me, but I stepped back. It's just for 3 days, I said, more to convince myself than him. We'll talk when I get back. As we drove away, Emily waving goodbye from the back seat, I caught a glimpse of Seth in the rearview mirror. He stood on the porch, looking lost and alone. For a moment, my resolve wavered. Then I remembered the lies, the secrets, the dismissals of my feelings. I pressed the gas pedal harder. The drive to my parents' lakeside cabin was quiet, Emily having dozed off shortly after we left. My mind raced with thoughts of the past few months, of the life I thought I had versus the reality I was facing. We arrived just as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the tranquil lake. My parents greeted us warmly, enveloping Emily in hugs and showering her with attention. As I watched them, a lump formed in my throat. This was what family should feel like, warm, supportive, loving. That night, after Emily was tucked in, I sat on the porch with my parents. The weight of everything came crashing down, and I found myself pouring out the whole story. Seth's secrets, the house, the constant belittling from his parents. Oh, sweetheart, my mother said, pulling me into a hug. Why didn't you tell us sooner? I was ashamed, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. I thought I could fix it. My father's voice was gruff with emotion. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Carolyn. That man has a lot to answer for. As we talked late into the night, a plan began to form in my mind. It was terrifying, but also exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control of my life. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of activity. While Emily enjoyed the lake with her grandparents, I made phone calls to lawyers, to financial advisors, to old friends who might have job leads. With each call, my resolve strengthened. On the last night of our stay, as Emily slept peacefully, I sat by the lake, my phone clutched in my hand. I had drafted and redrafted the message a dozen times. Finally, with a deep breath, I hit send. Seth, we need to talk when I get back. Things can't go on like this. I've made some decisions about our future. The response was almost immediate. What do you mean? Carolyn, what's going on? I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off my phone and looked out over the calm water. The peace I felt in that moment was in stark contrast to the storm I knew was coming. As dawn broke on our last day, I began packing our bags. Emily was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the turmoil in her parents' lives. I envied her innocence. Just as I zipped up the last suitcase, my phone buzzed. It was Seth. "I'm coming to get you and Emily. We need to sort this out now." Panic rose in my throat. This wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't ready to face him yet. Not here. Not now. "Carolyn?" My mother's voice called from downstairs. "There's someone here to see you." My heart pounding, I made my way down the stairs, and there, standing in the living room, looking disheveled and desperate, was Seth. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew. There was no going back. The life I had known, the marriage I had clung to, was over. The only question now was what would rise from its ashes? As Seth opened his mouth to speak, I raised my hand to stop him. "No, Seth," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "This time, you're going to listen to me." The tension in the room was palpable as Seth and I faced each other. My parents stood nearby, their protective presence giving me strength. "Carolyn, what's going on?" Seth demanded, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. "You can't just take our daughter and disappear like this." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I didn't disappear, Seth. I told you I needed time to think, and I have." "Think about what?" he asked, his eyes darting between me and my parents. "About us, about our future, about what's best for Emily." I paused, gathering my courage. "I want a separation, Seth." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Seth's face paled, then flushed with anger. "A separation? Are you out of your mind? We have a life together, a family." "Do we?" I countered, my voice stronger than I felt. "Because lately, it feels like we're just two strangers living in the same house, keeping secrets and making unilateral decisions." Seth's eyes narrowed. "This is about the house, isn't it? I told you I was trying to protect you." "No, Seth, this is about trust, about respect, about partnership." I pulled out a folder from my bag, the same one I had shown him days ago. "I've been doing some digging of my own. The business isn't just struggling, is it?" "You're on the verge of bankruptcy." Seth's face crumpled. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter." I cut him off. "What matters is that you lied to me. Again and again. You made huge decisions that affect our entire family without even consulting me." "I was trying to fix things," Seth shouted, his composure cracking. "I didn't want you to worry." "That wasn't your choice to make," I shouted back, years of pent-up frustration pouring out. "We're supposed to be partners, Seth, equals, but you've been treating me like a child, like I can't handle the truth." Seth's anger deflated, replaced by a look of defeat. "What do you want from me, Carolyn?" "I want honesty. I want respect. I want to be treated like an equal partner in this marriage." I took a deep breath. "But right now I don't think you're capable of giving me that." Just then, a small voice interrupted us. "Mommy? Daddy?" Emily stood at the foot of the stairs, her eyes wide with fear. Seth and I exchanged a look of guilt. We had been so caught up in our argument, we'd forgotten about our daughter. I knelt down, opening my arms to Emily. "It's okay, sweetie. Mommy and Daddy were just talking." As I held our daughter, I looked up at Seth. His face was a mask of pain and regret. For a moment I felt a flicker of doubt. Could we fix this? Should we try for Emily's sake? But then I remembered the lies, the secrets, the constant dismissal of my feelings. I thought about the future I wanted for Emily, one where she saw her mother as strong, respected, valued. "Seth," I said softly, "I think you should go. We'll talk more when we get back home." He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it, nodding slowly. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "I'm sorry, Carolyn, for everything. I hope it's not too late." As the door closed behind him, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief wash over me. My mother placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked. I looked down at Emily, still nestled in my arms, then back at my parents. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about ending something. It was about beginning something new. Something better. "No," I replied honestly, "but I will be." As I stood there, surrounded by the love and support of my family, I felt a newfound strength coursing through me. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in years, I felt ready to face it. Not as Seth's wife, not as Emily's mother, but as Carolyn. Strong, independent, and finally, truly free. The familiar streets of our neighborhood felt foreign as we drove past, Emily chattering excitedly in the back seat about seeing her toys again. My parents followed in their car, a convoy of support I never knew I needed until now. As we pulled into the driveway, my heart raced. Seth wasn't there. Good. This would be easier without him present. "Mommy, why aren't we going inside?" Emily asked as I unbuckled her. I knelt down, meeting her curious gaze. "Sweetie, we're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. It's going to be an adventure, okay?" Her little brow furrowed. "But what about Daddy?" The question I'd been dreading. I swallowed hard. Daddy needs some time alone right now, but he loves you very much, and you'll see him soon." As my parents helped gather our essentials, I slipped inside the house one last time. The silence was deafening. I moved through the rooms, memories flooding back, both good and bad. In our bedroom, I placed the letter I'd written on Seth's pillow. My hand lingered on the paper, a finality to the action that made my chest tighten. Back outside, I locked the door, feeling the weight of the key in my palm. This house, once my dream, now felt like a prison I was finally escaping. At my parents' house, as Emily explored her new temporary room, my mother pulled me aside. "Carolyn, are you sure about this?" I nodded, surprising myself with my certainty. "I am, Mom. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing the right thing." The next few days were a whirlwind. I filed for separation, met with lawyers, and started job hunting. Seth called and texted incessantly, alternating between anger, pleading, and promises to change. I held firm, only communicating about Emily's needs. A week after our return, as I was putting Emily to bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Seth. "I'm outside your parents' house. We need to talk." My heart raced, but I steeled myself. This confrontation was inevitable. Seth looked haggard as I met him on the porch. "Carolyn, please," he began. "I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Come home." I shook my head. "Seth, this isn't just about the house or the lies. It's about years of feeling undervalued, dismissed, and disrespected. I can't go back to that." "I'll change," he promised desperately. "I'll do whatever it takes." "That's just it, Seth," I said softly. "You shouldn't have to change who you are, and I shouldn't have to change who I've become. We've grown apart, and it's time we accept that. Tears filled his eyes. "What about Emily?" "We'll co-parent. She needs both of us, Seth, but she needs us happy and whole, not miserable and resentful." As Seth's shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a wave of compassion. Despite everything, I did still care for him. "Seth," I said gently, "I hope you find happiness. I really do, but I need to find mine too." After he left, I sat on the porch swing, gazing at the stars. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to face it. The next morning, as Emily and I ate breakfast, my phone pinged with a job offer, a position at a local community center helping families in need. As I read the email, tears of joy sprang to my eyes. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Emily asked, concern in her voice. I smiled, wiping my eyes. "Happy tears, sweetie. Mommy just got some very good news." As I hugged my daughter close, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. A chance to show Emily what strength, independence, and self-respect truly meant. A chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. Later, as I watched Emily play in the backyard with my parents, I felt a surge of gratitude. For their support, for my own resilience, and for the journey ahead. The path wouldn't be easy, but I was no longer afraid. I was Carolyn, mother, daughter, and now, architect of my own destiny. With a deep breath, I stepped into the sunshine, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The best chapters of my life, I realized, were yet to be written.